Hello everyone and welcome back to Southern Deadly Yarns. Our lovely guest today is Marlee Silva, a Gamilaroi and Dunghutti woman living just outside of Sydney. Marlee's an influencer and the co-founder of the super popular Instagram and podcast Tidda for Tiddas, which has inspired this beautiful first book of hers, My Tidda, My Sister, which she'll be chatting about today. Welcome, Marlee.
Yeah, welcome, Marlee. It's good to...
Oh, we're going to do this talking over each other to start, aren't we? I was just going to say, I don't know how I feel about being called an influencer, but thank you for having me. And I'm coming to you from Darawal country, south of Sydney, and want to start by paying my respects to this mob. It's beautiful country, even though it's, as I mentioned just before we went live, pouring down today. It feels like the middle of winter.
Wow, yeah, we're here on the lands of the Kaurna people today, and those that are joining in online, if you want to give a shout out to whose country you're on today, please do so. And yeah, it's customary to always acknowledge the country that you're on, so thank you to the Kaurna people, Nina Marty, Nari, Elijah Bravington, and just pay homage to their spiritual connection to the land and their continuing, culture, even though it's had a city dropped on it and this thing like an economy. It's sort of weird when you think about it, but there's still those special places, there's still those special trails, and those special stories that go with it. So we'd like to pay homage to the Kaurna people.
Cool. So to kick us off, Marlee, tell us, well, I've got written down here from influencer to podcaster to author. Tell us about the journey, but maybe correct me on that influencer title as well.
Yeah, I guess it's probably, I had someone say to me, because I feel very uncomfortable with the word, that it's really the most accurate, way to describe, I guess, what I've done in the last couple of years. I did start my career in the nonprofit sector, working with Aboriginal kids in high school, and being in that space and always working for as a proud Gamilaroi Dunghutti woman. I mean, that was always the goal. I wasn't really too fussed on what I'd do with my life or what I wanted to be when I grew up. But the most important thing was that I was doing something with community and doing something that was positively contributing in some way. Then it got to 2018, and a lot of us will remember that the NAIDOC theme that year was Because of Her We Can. We saw so many of our women, our aunties, our grandmothers at the forefront of the conversation for NAIDOC that year, and in a lot of mainstream media for the first time, which is really, really exciting and inspiring. And also a bit different to what we're used to. We started this conversation, we're talking about football. For me growing up, every time I saw it, well, it felt like for the most part, if I was seeing an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person on mainstream media, they were a male and they were an athlete, because we have always excelled in that area. And I think that's kind of the stereotype and expectation of Indigenous success, because that's what we've seen for so long. And I'm a massive sports fan. My dad was a professional rugby league player. So, that's a big part of my life, and I don't disregard that. But, there's a part of me that, felt there was something missing. And in my day-to-day life, in my own family, and the women that I was surrounded by, they had these incredible stories and so much strength and inspiration and wisdom that's relevant for everyone, that just wasn't being captured in a way that it should be. And so I guess, very much inspired by that NAIDOC theme and kind of getting towards the back end of the year, then, and being scared of what would happen once Because of Her We Can finished and there was no longer these stories coming out, I just started an Instagram page with my sister called Tiddas for Tiddas, Tidda being a word that a lot of Aboriginal people use as sister, and it just being a space where we would tell stories of the women that we knew, or if we heard a good story from somewhere or whatever, we'd just post it up. And it's very much, something just started as a side hobby, and there's something that made me feel really good every day, being able to talk about these amazing females. And, it's something now that's, I guess, been around for 2 years. People will realise if they go to Instagram. They won't be able to find it at the moment. We are deactivated and kind of in a bit of a shift from that side hobby. As I said, we started as into kind of trying to figure out the operations of almost a real business now. You know, we have a really amazing platform to draw attention to the things that matter. So we're trying to figure out how to make a website and all that kind of stuff, and we will be back. But somewhere in the midst of that as well, another, I guess, storytelling platform that I had previously had no experience with and didn't really understand the magnitude of is podcasting. And with our kind of original burst of popularity online, I was approached by the Mamamia Network, which is a mainstream, non-Indigenous organisation that has very much been at the forefront of podcasting in Australia, particularly female-centric podcasting. And their founder, Mia Friedman, actually personally reached out to me by sliding into my DMs on Instagram and asking me over for a cup of tea. And that was the beginning of last year, and it all felt a bit surreal. I thought I was getting catfished for a second, but I checked that her account had the blue tick on it, so we were fine. And I, went to their office and had that cup of tea and a conversation, and shared with that team there, what my purpose was to just have the stories of these amazing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women heard in spaces they weren't. So I did 2 seasons of the podcast with the Mamamia Network, with the intention always being that I would step out on my own and, learnt the ropes there, and was really lucky to find such a passion for audio, because I think, the tradition of oral storytelling is such a massive part of our culture. It's something we've been doing for over 60,000 years. So it's a very natural extension of what we still do in our yarns and with friends and family all the time. So it was awesome. I've definitely fell in love with podcasts, and I now this year it was very much a COVID isolation project. Did that, took that leap and stepped out on my own to, start a new iteration of my podcast called Always Was or Always Will Be Our Stories. Again, inspired by this year's NAIDOC theme, and the only difference being in my Tiddas for Tiddas podcast, it was just females that I was interviewing, but now I have some men along as well. So that's been pretty crazy. And a whirlwind, and somewhere in the midst of all of that, into my DMs slid another message, this time from a publisher from Heidi Grant Books, asking me if I'd ever thought about writing a book. And I could very happily, and happily is an understatement, I think, bursting at the seams, respond and say it's only been something I've dreamt of doing since I was a teenager. I've definitely, like I mentioned before, never been set on, I want to be this when I grow up, or I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But one thing I've always had a passion for and loved, and obviously I've gotten this far, so I must have some sort of skill set in it, is writing and telling stories. And I guess that's where My Tidda, My Sister was born.
It is a great book. It really is. And to encapsulate those younger voices, I always think about my nana and my aunties and these strong, awesome women, but you sometimes forget the youth and the young at heart. So yeah, thanks again for bringing that to our attention.
Yeah, it's good to know you can get published just by DMs.
So that's how you do it. Yeah. Doing it all wrong.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned that a couple of times now in a few conversations around the book, and my publisher, I think she feels like I've outed her a little bit of some of her tactics of getting writers, but it's very successful, and that's where our presence lived online, so it makes a lot of sense. And her senses were right that I am a writer, so it worked out well. I'm sure, yeah, that's not how it happens in the real world. I never thought it would happen like that. But, this is the modern era, I guess.
So can you tell us a little bit about the industry? If people are wanting to get published or have that story in them, Is there much you can say about the industry or sort of how you go about
I don't
it?
think I have a very realistic experience with the industry and getting published. You know, I did study creative writing at university, and you know, I think I was so like shocked by how it sort of fell into my lap because you know, I had amazing teachers who were also very realistic and talked about how many rejection emails you get if you send a manuscript to publishers. And I didn't even get to that point. It was more getting approached beforehand. So yeah, I'm the worst person to ask that because I don't have a normal way of experiencing it. But hey, I think like all writers know, like you don't write to get published. You don't write to sell books. You write because you have to, and it's just gives you life. That's my thing. I've, you know, there's not a day where I'm not writing something. So
Love it. Do it Marlee's way.
Yeah. Just staying on that theme of kind of industry insider, I know you just said you didn't know a lot about it, but I can't help, one of my favorite things, which is against the rules, I know, the cover of this book is so beautiful. And the artwork is by an Aboriginal artist, Rachel Sara, who I'm a big fan of. I've got one of her pieces in my house. And like I said to you before, I've got her earrings in today, especially, which let me tell you, these sold out in 30 seconds. I never clicked so fast in my life. So do you get to pick the artists that you work with? Did you always want to work with Rachel, or?
So Rachel and I actually know each other personally through sort of Instagram. Again, it's a weird world, but when we started having these conversations about the book and you know, very early in the writing stages of it, something that I personally love about Hardy Grant, and that was a big selling point for me to work with them, is how visual all of their books are. They're really something that's so striking that on bookshelf stands out, and kind of almost, you know, regardless of the content, everything that they seem to publish works as a coffee table book as well. I'm a very, you know, visual person as well, and you know, when we were talking about what the book actually was, you know, even before taking it to the acquisitions team at the publisher, we decided that we wanted it to be something that you could pick up and you know, enjoy in a lot of different ways with your senses, I guess. And I had this hope that you open any page and you can kind of pick it up. That's why like every story is kind of, you know, accessible, and you can sort of absorb it individually at different points. It doesn't have to be in order and things like that. And yeah, in those initial conversations, because Rachel has also worked with Hardy Grant in the past, with Adam Briggs's picture book and things like that. She was like the first on the list of artists to work with, and I was like sold. Like I already am in love with her color palette. I'm such a pink person. You can see the pink flowers behind me, things like, and purples and stuff like that. And it to me just intertwined so perfectly with the ethos and the core of the book, which is this warmth and inviting and you know, optimism and positivity, which is kind of what the colors evoke to me. And it's very much such an integral companion to the stories. So I'm incredibly grateful for that, and I don't think the book would be half of what it is without that element. So I'm really grateful.
Yeah, big shout out to Hardy Grant. We've worked with them a little bit this year for Thomas Mayer's book and Briggs's, as you mentioned. So yeah, we love Hannah and Kirsty and all the guys down there.
And we may hit them up for a few more things.
Yeah.
And just saying that, it does strike me as just a happy book, even though it's got some real sort of strong content to it. And you've been able to abstract sort of the characters and, you know, actually present some harrowing tales, but at the same time, there's that sort of silver lining. There's that positivity that comes through it all, and I think people really need that and crave that. Was that hard to try and get these stories into such a tight frame?
I think that you know, that's what the stories evoked for me as well, and it's a testament to the women that you know, were willing to share their stories with me. The thing that kind of blew me away, every single conversation I had, every interview, every, you know, kind of round of edits and listening back to kind of audio of their conversations and everything, I just thought, wow, there is this sort of, you know, matter of fact when it comes to the quite awful and devastating in some examples instances in these women's lives, but it hasn't even come close to denting their sense of hope or their sense of strength and resilience. And that's what inspired me. And I think, again, it's something that's so prevalent in our culture, in our community, and it's why we are the oldest surviving culture on earth, is because we've faced such enormities and we constantly overcome them. And some of them I had to say to these women, like, I need you to understand how incredible you are. Like, you're saying this, like, oh, this happened, blah, 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 but, you know, whatever. And they are achieving such incredible things on the other side of you know, devastation. And they don't even know to kind of stop and go, hey, like, that was, you know, something I should pat myself on the back for, you know, so such humility as well, which is just incredible. And I think it was, you know, every one of the women I spoke to's story is so different, but that's almost the universal element, is this you know, resilience and sort of never back down attitude and like, we're going to be okay feeling that came through it.
And was there one story that stuck out in particular to you?
Actually, again, before we came on air, when you were flicking through the book and mentioned Jola Cummings' story, which is pretty early on in the second part. She is someone I've come to become really good friends with, and she, again, it's very much like, as I was just saying, that sort of her ability to tell her story of growing up, her whole childhood in the out-of-home care system, her struggle with her identity, trying to reconnect with family, the trauma she faced at the hands of her foster carers, and then to come out on the other side of it. And now she's a really successful high school teacher who, you know, is working with young Aboriginal girls like herself, and her brother has a charity that specifically works with Aboriginal kids in care, and the two of them are just these powerhouses who are, you know, such incredible role models, I think, regardless of who you are or where you come from. And that Jolo, to me, we had our, I think I even write it in the story, we met in a cafe after I was working full time for as a consultant, and I, for my lunch break, met her in a cafe and was like, just going to sit down, have this conversation. I thought we'd have to meet a few times more before I wrote it, but she just was so incredible in that kind of half an hour chat that I got home from work, or was even on the train home from the city in Sydney, and kind of scribbling in a book, because it just sort of came out of me quicker and more succinctly than any of the other stories up to that point. So it was kind of, again, very early days, but it was just, she was so incredible. And I mean, I could say that about everyone who's in there, but that's the one that to me, was just really special.
Wow. And her brother Isaiah then, so he started a channel.
Yeah. So actually the first episode of my Always Was, Always Will Be Our Stories podcast is with him, with Isaiah. So and he, again, kind of extends on the story of both him and Jola growing up, and they're both so determined to provide a family for kids in care that they didn't feel they had growing up. And it's called ID Know Yourself, the charity. It's I highly recommend people check it out. So amazing. And I've done a few volunteer things with the kids in the program on the ground, and they're just so special, and you just want to do something to help the situation. I think another great honor I've had in making this book, and also through our Tiddas for Tiddas page, and kind of the whole journey we've had over the last couple of years, is just I guess an emphasis on the fact that, you know, every single one of us has some incredible story inside of us and has something to teach other people. And I feel like I've learned so much about so many different situations and experiences and things that are happening, you know, happening now or have happened in the past in our community. And yeah, I think the more diversity in the stories and the voices that we're hearing only strengthens us. So yeah, it's been such a privilege to engage with these kinds of stories and learn from all the people I've been able to speak with.
And it is great too, because it almost knocks that stereotypical view right in the face. It's just like, hang on a minute, we have some amazing people here, a culture that really should be celebrated, but you know, quite often there's this sort of permeating negative stereotype about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So yeah, I think even on that alone, it's really given a good positive message, particularly for young people who are like, you know, half of our mob are under 25. So
yeah,
really where we've got to focus. Have you been cooking up anything else while Auntie Rona's visited and everybody's in lockdown?
Well, I did have to, you know, get my book out in the world in this time, and was also doing a podcast. So I have been, you know, a little bit busy. But I guess, like, I think, you know, all of us have probably had more space to think about, you know, where we've been and where we want to go in this period, which, yeah, I think, you know, I talk heaps about, you know, positivity and optimism and that sort of stuff, because I'm such a firm believer in everything happens for a reason. And admittedly, I think one of the most beneficial things for me personally in this period, and particularly since the book's come out, is I've had space to take a bit of a breather. I am, you know, I turned and I feel closer to 40 some days because I have been so lucky to do a lot in the last, you know, 5 years, and it's been a lot more public facing since Tiddas for Tiddas emerged and really kind of you know, put me in public spaces I've not been before and things like that. But it is because when you're doing something you love, when it's becomes an extension of you, and particularly, you know, the beginning of 2020, I made I made the decision to step out and completely work for myself. So you know, once the pandemic hit, you, of course, all panic stations, like, why did I leave a full-time job? Now, how am I supposed to make money? But it ended up working out okay, and yeah, working for myself up until, yeah, just a couple of weeks ago, I was, you know, not doing it very healthily and working almost 7 days a week, and, you know, waking up in the middle of the night and this is my bed behind me, and then leaning across to this computer and doing emails and things, and when I couldn't sleep, which is just, you know, not sustainable. And I think that it was this sort of feeling of kind of being like, oh, you know, I have these amazing opportunities, and it's a waste if I'm not working on them all the time. And I've only got a certain amount of time, because I think there is a little bit of an obsession, especially in our community. And I think it's because our population is so young that in a lot of mainstream circumstances and even our media, like, young, exciting Indigenous person, that young element feels like there's a real time element on it. So certain opportunities only exist because you are under 30 years old or whatever. So I hope that you know, there has been a change and there definitely should be a change in, you know, what success looks like and what point you have to reach it in order for it to be valid. So that's something that I'm focusing on now for the back end of the year, is to kind of go, hey, it's okay that I woke up today feeling really, really tired because I've worked so much in the last couple of days, and I'm, you know, not on weather days like this, but I'm going to go to the beach today and read a book, and it's like fine. And that's something I felt that has been, I think is quite common in a lot of our experiences, especially for people who, you know, young professionals are feeling like there's a time limit, or, you know, working and you're burning yourself out. And I think that it's something that I can thank Auntie Rona, as you called her, for showing me that, nothing's going to fall apart because you have to take a few days off.
Yeah, I can relate to that idea. I think it's like the millennial burnout. You want to rush to do all this stuff before you're 30 because after you're 30, like, it's not going to be impressive anymore because you're a real Melbourne or something.
It's because there's all those 30 under 30 awards, and it's like, there's no awards of 40 under 40 or something, like, I don't know. It just seems silly. Any success to me is happiness, and at any age that it's impressive. Like, I just think it's silly. I think it's also probably, a shift in our mindset of this kind of stuff. It's probably going to be aided with how many, middle-aged people are going to be having to change their careers now. My mum is one of them. She's in her office, the room next to me. She works for Qantas, and she doesn't know if she's going to have a job by the end of the year. And she's, in her 50s, and she's only ever worked for the one company in this one industry. And so there's this fear of I've got to change my whole life at this time. So hopefully we kind of realize that, your life doesn't stop at 30, and you can kind of do all this sort of stuff, even though, again, as we've been talking about in the book, especially the third section, which is all about young women I spoke to who are kind of teenagers, and gave me so much hope for the future. They're kicking butt and have this incredible confidence and this so much aspirations for the future, and I feel like they are trying to reach them in the next kind of 10 years as well. And there's value for all of it, I think, is the point I'm trying to make. And I'm going on a tangent now, but
quite okay. We like tangents. And I think there's a Qantas CEO coming up sometime.
Oh yes, one in there as well.
But it is funny, and I might be showing my age a little bit, but there was a band called Tism who I think are going to re-release stuff again. And they were around in the 80s and 90s, and they had a song called "If You're Not Famous at 14, You're Finished." So
bit of an extreme example there.
Yeah, but it's nice to be able to take that time, because I think a lot of us, we don't want to become burnt out and become members of that charcoal club, but at the same time we want to do everything we can to try and close this gap that is just so disproportionate for Aboriginal people, and there is so much that needs to be done, and people just want to roll up their sleeves and get into it. But I think to undo 250 years of hurt, it's not going to take a single generation to do that. It will be sort of a longer process. So I guess there is that, time to pause, reflect, and read a book on a beach sometime and just take that time out.
Yeah. Speaking of that, Marlee, that hurt that's been done and that really hard journey that unfortunately Aboriginal people have been on, there was a quote that stuck out in particular to me in your book on page 90. I'll read it quickly and then I'll get you to comment if you can. A non-tokenistic way to value the knowledge of a friend or Aboriginal person you work with is to view the education you wish to receive as a process that takes time and needs to take place on their terms. It's about opening the dialogue, building genuine connections, and being vulnerable and honest as to why you want to be part of this with us, and particularly why now. That really resonated with me as a non-Aboriginal person, and I wondered if you could speak on that a little bit for us.
Yeah, I think that that particular quote has never been more relevant than in 2020. We saw with the surge of the Black Lives Matter movement earlier on in the year, which was definitely affected by being in a global pandemic. And I think just a general sense of frustration and desire for change across our entire society globally. But, with that, and, from personal experience, when that sort of erupted, there was a lot of people who all of a sudden were reaching out, seeking education. And, for myself and a lot of my peers, I guess, when you have, again, a bit of a more public profile, you get a lot of people reaching out to you and asking for things and, questions on, is it okay if I post a black square, like things like that on your Instagram, and then all the way to like, what's your perspective on what's happening? And, especially when it sort of all kicked off, which was around Reconciliation Week this year in May. So Reconciliation Week started with it coming out that Rio Tinto had blown up sacred sites that were over 40,000 years old, and sort of ended, or was in the middle there. We saw in America the death of George Floyd, and then all of a sudden there were the protests happening. And I had to turn my phone off because I was getting some journalist had passed out my phone number, and I've never figured out who it was. But honestly, I was constantly being called to ask for other people's contacts for, can you write this? Can you speak on this? Can you speak on this? Blah, 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 blah. First of all, I'm one person and I have one perspective on something. I'm, again, young. I haven't lived through a lot of this stuff and have a, very particular context that can, I can only share my opinion. So there's lots of other people you can talk to. And two, what you don't realize is in asking us to share our experiences, our thoughts, our feelings, and all that kind of stuff in the middle, particularly then, in the middle of a week that is incredibly emotionally draining and devastating and so, I don't know, frightening in a lot of ways as well. It's asking a lot from us. And then on the back of that, there are a lot of organizations that wanted to do campaigns with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people or more diverse people of color. And all of a sudden, really wanted to be woke or to, do some sort of action that was more reactionary than sustainable. And that just, I think, for a lot of people I know as well, took a lot out of us and had me reflecting a lot on what the kind of basis of that quote is, which is that people underestimate the energy and the cost that comes with us offering that education. And that education, the only education I can offer, from my opinion, is my lived experience. I can provide you my lived experience and, the things that I have personally have firsthand experience with or have opinions on, or, I can share parts of my dad's experience as well. And every time I do that, that's a part with that, the emotional connection, the spiritual connection, even to that trauma and to that struggle, or that overcoming of a hurdle, or when it comes to sort of more common knowledge stuff around Aboriginal identity, or why we don't celebrate on January 26th or this, that, and the other. It's something that I think some very well-meaning non-Indigenous people, I think that's important for me, that I had to remind myself in certain situations that there's not malice behind a lot of these questions. There's this genuine desire for education, but there's a misunderstanding of what we are doing when we provide. The misunderstanding being, you ask someone, why they like chocolate ice cream over vanilla ice cream, and you go, okay, and I go, because whatever, and they go, okay, that's just a fact and it's a tick and that's your opinion, whatever, we move on. But when it comes to cultural elements of us and things that are very much part of our life experience, there is that cost with it. And I think that I've seen, or heard of examples of people I know who are, the receptionist at a really big organization that, kind of just does their jobs as a receptionist or as an EA or something. And then it comes to an ADOC week and then they're the face of the company because they're the only identifying Indigenous person in the company. Like there's stuff like that where it feels a bit tokenistic, where there can be this sense of, I'm doing you a favor by giving you a space to share what you believe. There's a little bit of this residual paternalism when it comes to, I guess, the growing trend. It is a little bit trendy to have Aboriginal people speak up in certain contexts and things like that. And I think there's just a lack of respect, and again, it's not malicious, but it can just be this misstep of like, but I'm doing this is a good thing because I'm giving you this space, but not a consideration of like, do I feel comfortable doing this? Do I feel like you know, do I feel culturally safe doing this? Do I think that the environment that I'm doing it is going to, you know, protect me and my, you know, just, yeah, my sense of safety in the workspace and things like that. Or, you know, are we out to dinner or we're having a few drinks on a Friday night and I'm just trying to relax and you're asking me to be the spokesperson for my entire race and 60,000 years of history, and can you just please like let me be, because it's been a really tough week anyway, you know, like there's things like that I hear all the time. And I think that it's this, you know, sort of being patient and asking if someone is okay and in a space where they feel they have the energy and the strength to share X, Y, and Z, or even if they want to at all. And that, yeah, not just expecting it because, you know, they're the token Aboriginal person in the room, I think is kind of what that goes back to. And there's definitely been a lot of that because of the fact this sort of conversation was so much in mainstream media for that chunk of time. But it also comes up again around January 26th every year. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in 2021 after, you know, what felt like there was going to be this really monumental change because of the ways the conversations were being had earlier this year. So, yeah, it's I think, and again, that quote goes back to, you know, reconciliation is a term that a lot of blackfellas don't even think is, you know, correct because there was nothing, you know, conciled in the first place to reconcile. But if you are going to go by that term and to have reconciliation, true reconciliation, it's not this something you get to a point when you tick the box and like, okay, it's all good now. It's a forever thing that our society is always changing, and, you know, Aboriginal identity and our community is always changing, like everyone does. So we've always got to be working on that. We've always got to be working to be better and to work better for everyone in our society. So I think that's the main point, is that if you want to be better as a non-Indigenous person, you want to be more of an ally, you want to make space for people of colour, you've constantly got to be working on it and constantly looking for more education.
Wow.
Yeah, some valuable insight for allies there. Thank you.
And I think too that there is always that pigeonholing that goes on. It's just like, oh, that's okay, we'll put you in there. And I think too what you've done with podcasts and getting these stories out is that you've actually opened up those lanes to say, well, hang on a minute. Like, people just don't have to be segregated into this cultural realm, and that's what we're good for. And, you know, we'll be wheeled out and here's our Pope of Blacktown for the week. It's, you know, actually saying, well, no, we can cross over into different parts and different industries. And we're not just good for what you think we are good at, but we're good at multiple things. And, you know, we're continually proving that all the time. So I think it's good that that's been done. On sort of January 26, just with that theme, and you were hoping that it would change, I'm hopeful that it will. I'm hopeful that people will see what they're celebrating is cultural genocide, and if they want to celebrate that, then that's fine. You know, they're the oppressors. They can go and practically do what they want. They seem to do most of the time anyway. But, you know, what's some of your thoughts around that day? And, you know, you've touched on it in the book a little bit as well, but, you know, is there, you know, some thoughts that you have about that day?
I think my relationship with the day is one of the, if not, I guess, the sort of oldest example in my life that indicated to me being Aboriginal made me completely different to the people around me. So where I live, where I have grown up near Cronulla Beach, which some people might know the name of because of race riots that happened in 2005. That's a really clear indicator of the kind of, you know, society that I grew up in. A very high white Anglo-Saxon population, hardly any people of colour, let alone Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people. So it meant that I was on the outer as an Aboriginal kid. Me and my sister, the only two identifying kids at our school, basically our entire schooling. And, you know, it didn't mean too much when you're, you know, in primary school, because no one really cares about anything. You just care about like whether you're going to play soccer at lunchtime. But once we got to high school, you know, I talk about it in the book. You know, my dad picking me up from school one day and kids asking why my dad was black, and you know, I didn't even know. You know, I knew what a blackfella was, but like there's something quite different when you ask the way that they asked me why my dad was black, and then why I was the color that I am, and et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, that initial stuff was like weird and again, pointed me out as this different kid. And then, you know, all of a sudden I found there'd be this real surge of questions and perpetuation of stereotypes, and it kind of always happened at the beginning of the year, around January 26th. And I feel like, you know, as I grew up, the day got more heated, and I have always, like, we've never, I personally have never celebrated Australia Day. My sister has, though, and I think that's part of our journey as well. So many of us kind of walk in these two worlds, and it's complex and it's difficult, but something that both my sister and I can agree on is that it was, you know, for us growing up, the hardest time of the year, period. It was incredibly emotionally tumultuous. I used to have massive screaming matches with my sister around the weekend, because I'd get angry at her that me, my mum and my dad would go to survival day events in the city, in Sydney, and my sister wanted to hang out with her friends for Australia Day things at their houses and things like that. And it's such a complex thing, and I think that is so hard to navigate, for particularly for young Aboriginal people who are kind of growing up with that one foot in each world. And now it just opens this, it opens this kind of floodgate of, you know, people who have their very well-formed opinions on the day, and ready to kind of deliver to you as the Aboriginal person they know, who, you know, often corner you in social situations to kind of be like, you know, this is days important for me and shouldn't change. We shouldn't pander to the minority and things like that. You know, we kind of all know this rhetoric. And then our mainstream media reflects that as well. And it's at its core, I think the point I'm trying to make here is it is such an emotionally draining and sometimes quite scary or devastating day, not even, you know, of course, because of the history of what it indicates, but also because of what happens now. You're asked so much of when it is a day of mourning for us on top of that. And we kind of just do it, you know, through the motions, go this same discussion again and again and again. And a lot of the time it doesn't feel like we're getting anywhere. But then, you know, in the last couple of years for me, Yarbin is the name of the Survival Day Festival in Sydney that I go to every year and always have. The number of people who show up now who are non-Indigenous is phenomenal. And there is this real desire from my generation, my age group, to be like, we don't want Australia Day either. We want to have a day, you know, if we are to celebrate the country, you know, that is inclusive, and, or, you know, we can actually have constructive conversations about what it means to be an Australian and how we actually can come to terms with the fact that it's, you know, a falsehood of a nation in a lot of ways, because it was founded on lies. But what does that mean now, and how can we include, you know, our migrant populations and so many other groups that now make up this society? And I feel so much more hopeful than I did growing up, because of the ways that I see people just being a lot more respectful and not wanting to just ask you a question about something because they want to tell you why you're wrong. And I would like to see more in mainstream media, less of this kind of demonizing of us for wanting to make this change. I think we're often looked at as being, you know, just haters of the country and wanting kind of this division to remain. That's the way we've been portrayed, and it's just not true. And I don't think, it would solve all the problems to change the date. And I don't even think changing the date would be true success in this instance. I think it's about changing the day, what it means, who we are, how we look at ourselves, what makes us proud to be from this continent. And I think that, some of the answers to that lie in true respect for our culture and our and the many countries that we all live on that make up what's now known as Australia and sort of things like that. But I think that just simply changing the date doesn't achieve as much as having that really constructive conversation and changing what it means and who we are as it's a community, I think, as a national community, is the beginning of it. And I think, again, it's one of those things where it's like, we could kind of change the date on the calendar and do a lot of work around it, whatever. Then there's all this other stuff that's going on as well. So, I think, and I've heard kind of older people in our community be like, is that the most important thing? Is this the most important thing that we, the hill that we die on is we have to change this date? No, we have to change the country. So I'd love to see it changed, but maybe there's other ways for it to be made better as well.
Yeah, what do you want to spend your time on? What, ditch do you want to die in, kind of speak? Shall we open it up to Q&As?
Yeah, we've got a little bit of time for just a couple of audience questions. We've had a couple come in already. Judy wants to know, in a corporate space, non-Indigenous people tend to struggle to learn, understand and deepen their knowledge. We touched on that earlier. Do you have any advice on how to engage more meaningfully and respectfully?
I think every business is going to be different. But when I was working in the corporate space, admittedly, I was still working for an Aboriginal organisation, but we did a lot of work with non-Indigenous organisations. And I think what my biggest learning in those interactions was there's things that we did as a majority Aboriginal team in the place I was working that could be so beneficial for every single workplace, regardless of whether there's Indigenous people there or not. So there's particular Indigenous knowledges and practices that have modern examples that I think are so beneficial to a lot of work environments. It's quite simple things. I remember being in boardrooms and going around the table and everyone sort of introduces themselves. And I was lucky in the group I was working with, we all kind of, when we introduce ourselves, your job title is sort of the last thing you say. The first thing is like who your mob is and where you're from. And then you sort of like try and figure out how you're connected to the other people in the room and, things you have in common based on your identity. But there's a way to do that I think is, really important in particular corporate spaces where partnerships are really key, is this respect for people's identity outside of their job title. That's a really like tangible thing. But there's a way to incorporate a value for education around Indigenous people, and particularly the land that your office is on, or in these days when everyone's working from home, that your employees work from. This real value for knowing the land that you're on and the history of it, and also, what it means for your everyday work practices and that sort of mindfulness. And maybe it's even, again, something that we've seen 2020 reveal as something that's so important is the mental health and well-being of your employees. Again, there's such a value in our people's connection to land and how that can be such a massive part of our own healing and, sense of self, that should be something that's encouraged for all people. Obviously, it's a very different sort of relationship for non-Indigenous people, but you can still care for and love and admire the land and the history about it. And I think that's something that a lot of people can take on board, and just if you have that kind of inbuilt in your workplace as something that you value. And, I see a lot more now workspaces and teams doing acknowledgements of country before every meeting and things like that. And like, that's a great place to start. And so it's like cultural awareness training and all that sort of stuff. but it's about making sure that, you know, it's not just to tick a box. You really understand and you find value and you find pride in your team, in your business, doing these sorts of things, because it is something to be proud of. It's something that you do, you know, i.e. an acknowledgement. You do it because you really are showing respect for the fact that you've been allowed to exist on this land, or travel safely across it, or work on it. You know, and you also acknowledge the fact that it came to be the way it is, in a way that there was no consent in it, but you can still, you know, try and repair that fact by just, you know, providing that education again and constantly working on it in a workspace. I think those are just things to start with, but again, it's always, you know, working harder, and probably something else is, if you do have a business, thinking about how you can, you know, with you know, the Indigenous procurement policy was the massive thing that came from the federal government, but you can do it in simple ways of, if you're catering for something, is there a local Indigenous caterer that you can use? Or if you've got to buy stationery, there are Indigenous businesses you can buy from, and things like that. That encourages self-determination and does support our community by putting money into our businesses.
No, I think that's really important. Particularly too, I mean, there's so many tangents I could go off on, but this idea of building your business, and you're building yours as well, and it's something to call your own, and I think that is empowerment. You know, that is, you know, this is mine. This is I own it, and you know, I think now we're starting to see the generational wealth start to build for Aboriginal people, and we've never seen that before. So we are getting stronger. We're getting more and more businesses. We're getting that permeation through the sort of classes, as it were. I've lost my train of thought. Is there anything else that we wanted to?
Well, we might ask this one more audience question, and then we'll quickly.
Hang on a sec. That's where I was. I just wanted to say as well that when we introduce ourselves, we say who we are, where we're from, and why that's important to us. It's almost as though we value that above, you know, your job title. But in other cultures, it's just like, oh, my job title, and that's what I am. And, and you can see why people get so disillusioned and grumpy when they retire and that thing anymore.
Yeah, something to think about. I always say I'm a librarian. That's the first thing I say.
Yeah.
Interesting, isn't it?
But we have also called you other things, but we won't say. But anyway.
Question from Leanne.
Hang on.
Sorry, yeah.
Oh, and I was going to say, as an Arumana person, we're sort of like, we're all known as sort of being prophetic and things like that. So, you know, philosophical people. And I couldn't help, there was a bit of philosophy going on in here as well. And one of the people have written saying, has writing this book changed you? Has it grounded your soul? Has it done more for you as a person?
I might need a little bit more space from it to be able to answer that better. I think it was, you know, there's something about it being, for me, from essentially from 15 years old, like that being the light at the end of the tunnel. Like that's the thing at the top of the mountain. That's the end of the trail. What I'm kind of striving for is to have this book. And because I kind of, you know, in my wildest dreams, imagined it happening, you know, maybe in retirement and maybe self-published, what it's forced me to do is kind of reevaluate what my dreams are. You know, it was such an incredible honor, and it did take a lot out of me in absolutely not in a negative way, but I gave so much of myself for it to, you know, do the absolute, you know, best by the stories that I was gifted by the women who I spoke to. That I think it'll take a while for me to think about, you know, what I write next or what I do next. But yeah, it's put me in a really unique position I didn't think I'd be in, where, you know, I'm at the quarter century mark and going, you know, what's my big dream and what I want to be when I grow up even more. So I find I'm feeling quite reflective and quite, you know, yeah, I mean, it's so incredibly grateful, and I feel it has been such an incredible achievement that I'm really proud of, and sort of not, you know, not too ashamed to admit that I am really, really proud of it. And I think that, you know, I hope that it just has a positive impact on a lot of, you know, anyone who touches it. And yeah, I think that's what it's done for me the most, is kind of go, okay, well, what's next, and what's most important to me, and was that you know, that was what I was supposed to do, obviously, but what's the next thing that I'm supposed to do? Yeah, I'm very much a gut person, and you know, just trusting my gut and kind of going with the flow with whatever opportunity pops up is how I've always operated. So yeah, I don't know what the next hill is, or what's the next thing I'm pursuing, but yeah, I'm obviously incredibly grateful for it, and yeah, just trying to figure that out now, like what I want to be, almost, even though I'm an author, that's what I've always wanted to be. Like, you know, what's the next thing?
Wow. Well, when I was reading it, I got this sort of youthful, chirpy happiness, and then also like this sort of old soul coming through the book as well. So I'll be, very anticipatory. Am I making good words now?
Maybe.
As to what you do next. I think there's great things afoot.
Yeah, we can't wait to see. Well, I think that's a really nice note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us, Marlee. We're so stoked to have you on the series.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a joy having this chat with you guys. And yeah, I'm really glad that you also have enjoyed the book.
We loved it. Thank you. Now, before we go, the book is available to borrow from Onkaparinga Libraries. So be sure to place a hold and have a read, because it is wonderful. We'll send out a feedback email this afternoon, and it's really important that we gather feedback from events like this so that we know you guys enjoy them and that we can keep doing them. The recording will be on our website this afternoon, and we'll quickly plug our very last Southern Deadly Yarn, which is next week, with Uncle Archie Roach, to celebrate the 30th anniversary of his picture book, Took the Children Away, with a re-release, and it's gorgeous. We can't wait to talk to him.
Wow.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks again, Marlee.
And thanks for the inspiration.
Yeah.
No worries. Thank you. See ya.
Bye.